When Starfield launched 1 year ago today on September 6, 2023, we were introduced to three major factions that control most of the settled systems. The bureaucratic United Colonies, the laissez-faire Freestar Collective, and the enigmatic House Va'ruun. While we received quite a bit of information about the first two factions, House Va'ruun has largely remained a mystery. On September 30th, 2024, the Shattered Space DLC is set to draw us deeply into the story of this mysterious people. I'm the Irresolute Cartographer, and this video will detail everything I've found on House Va'ruun as it currently exists in Starfield. Before we get started here, I must make it explicitly clear that there are spoilers here, most specifically when it comes to information gleaned from conversations with one of the main companions. I'm going to avoid mentioning anything to do with the main quest that doesn't explicitly deal with House Va'ruun, but there will be minor spoilers for that section too. With that said, let's get started. As with all the stories in Starfield, the story of House Va'ruun starts with humanity's flight from Earth. In 2150, it was discovered that Earth was failing, and within half a century it would be uninhabitable. Luckily, humanity was already spread across the solar system with many colonies, and gravity jump drive technology capable of propelling ships faster than the speed of light was deep in development. By 2156, the first ship jumped to the Alpha Centauri system and found habitable worlds. To organize the exodus from Earth, the United Colonies was formed in 2159. In 2160, New Atlantis was founded on Jemison in the Alpha Centauri system, and the following year it became the capital for the United Colonies. As the evacuation of Earth ramped up, many of those who now lived in New Atlantis were chafing under the bureaucracy of the UC. In response to the demands of people for more freedom, the United Colonies issued the Centaurus Proclamation in 2161, granting their people legal authority to found their own colonies around distant stars and form their own governments. While colonists began to spread, the first faction to form from the Centaurus Proclamation was the Freestar Collective in 2188. 2 years later, a colony ship bound for distant worlds left New Atlantis and disappeared. While the disappearance of ships was likely a not altogether uncommon occurrence, the incident became significant when those lost colonists returned 40 years later as a new faction, House Va'ruun. When that ship left New Atlantis in 2190, it first performed a grav jump to the Sol system. It was upon its second jump away from the Sol system to an unknown star when something extraordinary is said to have happened. During this jump, one of the colonists, a young man named Janan Va'ruun, claimed to have experienced an encounter with a cosmic being, the Great Serpent. According to Janan, this Great Serpent is an immortal being beyond time and space. He is the creator of the universe who breathed life into it and who has been away from his dominion for millennia. He told Janan that he had slumbered after his act of creation but will soon return. He told Janan to prepare for his return, an event known as the Shrouding. While the Great Serpent is said to emit celestial light, the Shrouding is an eternal embrace that will cast all those but the Promised into shadow. The Promised being the term members of House Va'ruun use to refer to themselves. The Promised are the worshippers of the Great Serpent, or as they put it, those who know the truth of the Great Serpent and his inevitable return. The Promised believe they will be spared the destruction of the Shrouding, and indeed will be rewarded for serving the Great Serpent in his stead. Later members of the Promised, such as Ambassador Khazak Balmor, have described the Great Serpent as more than a god. It is fate itself. Quote, "The Great Serpent made us who we are today. Its voice speaks to us, shepherding us through the dark, and infuses our lives with a meaning the universe so often fails to provide." Close quote. He also says, quote, "The Great Serpent has always provided me a path in my darkest moments." Close quote. Regardless of the nature of the Great Serpent, the worship of this celestial being has become the focal point of society within House Va'ruun. Whatever the original name for the home system of House Va'ruun, its current name and even location is unknown at this time. Though we don't yet know the exact location, systems to the galactic northeast around Dakaran, Moloch, Nira, Ophion, Serpentis, and Zosma seem to be regularly patrolled by those of the Promised. What we do know is that they named their new homeworld Va'ruun Kai, and founded on this world the great city of Dazra. Va'ruun Kai is home to unique wildlife such as the venom tree, a plant that showers its surroundings with supposedly harmless spores and has poisonous sap, and the groat, a smelly, cantankerous species raised for its milk, a staple in the diet of the Promised. The groats are also potentially part of a coming-of-age ritual known as the Rite of Krajar. To be clear, the groats absolutely are part of a coming-of-age ritual. There's simply a question of if this ritual and the Rite of Krajar are the same ritual. The children of the Promised are given a groat to raise. They care for it and milk it, and when the time comes, they kill the groat and fashion its skull into the hilt of a dagger. The lesson with these groats is, quote, "Through this groat, we are shown the connection that we have to the Great Serpent, that all things serve the Serpent and can be tools for his use in more ways than one." Close quote. This dagger, made with a groat skull, is worn at all times as a tenet of their faith. Similar to the iron blade, Sikhs are required by their religious tenets to carry, a kirpan. The meaning behind the blades is, quote, "The Great Serpent is always with us, as is the danger of those who defy and oppose him." Close quote. Besides this, we know that the members of House Va'ruun pray at least once a day in the morning, and practice marriage ceremonies unlike those observed in the rest of the settled systems, although we don't yet know explicitly what they entail. As for the outside world, the Promised believed that, quote, "Those who do not follow the Great Serpent do not matter, for they are lost. Their fate is fixed and grim," unquote. And while the Promised will be by the side of the Great Serpent when he returns, the fates of those outside House Va'ruun are sealed. Romantic relationships between the Promised and outsiders are unheard of. They do not trust outsiders, do not rely upon them, and ultimately view them as threats. Outsiders are not even allowed on Va'ruun Kai under penalty of death. It wasn't long after House Va'ruun revealed itself in 2230 that these beliefs reared their head. For 10 years, it seemed like these lost colonists were a strange group who wanted to spread the worship of their snake god, but otherwise appeared harmless. Unfortunately, in 2240, this worship spawned a war of extermination known as the Serpent's Crusade. For 23 years, House Va'ruun attacked the United Colonies, Freestar Collective, and independent organizations across the settled systems. One of the best-known events in this war was the destruction of the UC star station in the Wolf system known as the Din. While the ruins of the original Den can still be found in orbit above Etheria, the UC rebuilt the station in orbit over Chthoniya. Battles continued in the system until the end of the war. The fighting finally ended in 2263 with the death of Janan Va'ruun and his replacement by his heir Jarek Va'ruun. Jarek sued for peace, and the war came to a close. The best explanation I can produce for the reason House Va'ruun sought to destroy the rest of humanity is that Janan Va'ruun believed that it was the will of the Great Serpent that the Promised wipe out the non-believers. Perhaps this was to serve as the shrouding that would cast all the non-believers into darkness, or to draw the Great Serpent in to aid his people. Regardless of his goals, when Janan died, Jarek and the High Council claimed that it was the Great Serpent's desire that they make peace. Whether this was a legitimate belief, a pragmatic move to save their people, or there was some other reason, we don't yet have any other information. Overall, the Serpent's Crusade was a disaster for House Va'ruun. While the population of humanity was certainly significantly reduced by the final collapse of Earth's habitability in 2203, there are still far more non-believers than those of the Promised. Not only did the war deplete House Va'ruun, it destroyed its relationships with other factions. At some point between the end of the Serpent's Crusade in 2263 and the end of the Colony War in 2311, House Va'ruun attempted to normalize relations with the rest of the settled systems. They established an embassy in New Atlantis and deployed an ambassador to the capital of the United Colonies. I have trouble nailing down precisely when this happened, as the information isn't exactly clear. One source points to the embassy opening not long after the end of the Serpent's Crusade and emptying shortly after the Colony War's armistice in 2311, while other sources imply that it was open for an extremely short period of time, seemingly implying that it was open only briefly and closed shortly after the armistice. It's possible that the embassy operated from around 2263 to around 2311, but the logs kept by the ambassador don't seem to indicate that. Regardless, what we do know is that House Va'ruun occupied their embassy in New Atlantis for a time before most of the house retreated to Va'ruun space, leaving only the ambassador behind. As the timeline isn't clear, we should talk about what took place in the settled systems around this time, the Colony War. While the Serpent's Crusade was the most recent conflict to flow across the settled systems, it was not the first. From 2196 to 2216, the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective fought the Narian War. Sparked by a confrontation over control of the Narian system, the war was the first fought with grav drive technology. Humanity was still in the process of evacuating Earth, and had yet to really develop proper warships, so the conflict was mostly hit-and-run attacks and small skirmishes. That said, it was a consequential war, and that it created the term the Settled Systems, and laid out the rules for colonization by the UC and the FC. One of these rules, specifically that neither were allowed to control more than 3 star systems, was put to the test in 2307, when the FC began farming on Vesta and the unaligned Lunara system. The UC called foul, and shortly after, the Colony War began. While not the deadliest war humans have ever fought, the Colony War fought between the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective from 2308 to 2311 was the most destructive war in human history. Unlike the Narian War, both sides were adequately prepared for war this time. The environment of the planet of Nira was ruined by orbital bombardment, mech warfare, and xeno warfare, weapons that were used across the settled systems. In the closing days of the war, the United Colonies attempted an assault on the Freestar Collective's home system Cheyenne. In the final battle, the FC fielded their own military ships and a massive fleet of civilian ships that overwhelmed the UC fleet. In the aftermath of this defeat, the UC sued for peace and the FC agreed. The Colony War officially ended with the Armistice, an agreement that saw limits on warship numbers, execution of war criminals, and the locking away of the most destructive technologies utilized in the conflict. This armistice was signed by the United Colonies, the Freestar Collective, and House Va'ruun. Though House Va'ruun appears to have stayed out of the conflict, they were determined to play a role in galactic politics and helped to secure the Armistice Archives, the repository of all knowledge of those hyper-destructive weapons. It wasn't long after this that the House Va'ruun embassy was abandoned. When Ambassador Khazrak Balmor arrived in New Atlantis, he came with the best intentions. He believed that the only way House Va'ruun would survive in the long run was to engage in diplomacy. Not long after the embassy opened and he arrived, he found the building facing daily protests. Citizens of the UC unhappy with the embassy's existence. The ambassador was sympathetic to their concerns, as his people had attempted a war of extermination against them, but he was dedicated to changing their minds. Progress with UC diplomats was slow, but he believed he was making gains in building a better relationship. Everything changed with the arrival of another dignitary from House Va'ruun. Siam Avan, a gravid or high priestess of the Promised, arrived at his embassy with troubling orders. While publicly she claimed to be working towards peace, privately she was telling Ambassador Balmor to spy on his UC counterparts. While he was working towards peace, she was looking for an advantage in the next war. He was hoping to make her see reason when there was a diplomatic incident. At a dinner party hosted by United Colonies Deputy Diplomat Roland, an inebriated officer asked Siam Avan, "But how can we trust you, Snakes, after what you did?" Tipped over the edge, she left the dinner party, went back to the embassy, and was practically on her way back to Va'ruun Kai by the time Ambassador Balmor caught up with her. When he asked where she was going, she replied, "I've seen all I need to." Despite reassurances from Dazra, including Jarek Va'ruun himself, that his mission was to continue, it was only a short time later that diplomatic relations were officially cut off between the UC and House Va'ruun. A message from Dazra came to the embassy with a simple order: return. Almost all the staff did, with the exception of the ambassador himself. Though his government had ordered him home and cut off communications with the embassy, Ambassador Balmor stayed there and preserved House Va'ruun's commitment to the armistice. Because of his continued presence, he was able to authorize the opening of the archives a few times. With most of the staff gone, the embassy fell into disrepair. The Venom Tree brought from Va'ruun Kai took over the main floor of the embassy. The ambassador left the embassy only rarely and eventually not at all. He seems to have attempted to avoid loneliness by setting up mannequins around the embassy. Not knowing if he was dead or alive, the United Colonies occasionally sent spies into the embassy to search for him, but he was able to evade their detection by hiding in the boughs of the Venom Tree. The ambassador was able to justify ignoring his government's orders with the following statement, quote, "House Va'ruun committed itself to the armistice. This was said at the time to be the desire of the Great Serpent, and I do not believe the Great Serpent decides such things on a whim. So when my brethren left, I remained, honoring the Serpent's will as I saw fit, as is the right of all his followers." This statement gives us interesting insight into House Va'ruun, and shows not only how the ambassador justifies working for peace, but tells us why the settled systems is still fighting House Va'ruun on a small scale. When the Serpent's Crusade ended in 2263 with the proclamation by Jarek Va'ruun and the High Council that the Great Serpent wanted peace, there were those of the Promised who viewed it as illegitimate. They saw it as a ploy to end the war, not as a legitimate recitation of the will of the Great Serpent. Ignoring their government's orders to stop fighting and come home, the Zealots have continued the crusade on a far smaller scale. Rather than large-scale battles, these fanatics attack small groups of ships, outposts, and star stations. Though they often stay close to home, warding off incursions into Va'ruun space, such as the Argos Extractor's sulfur mine on Kazal, they have been as bold to strike a star station in the UC capital system of Alpha Centauri itself. They've even been seen in the Sol system, where they observed Janan Va'ruun's commune with the Great Serpent as his ship jumped from the system. While they are almost always hostile to outsiders, a recitation of the litanies of the Promised can on occasion ward off attack. They operate out of outposts and factories abandoned by the UC and FC after the Colony War, similar to the Crimson Fleet, Ecliptic, and Spacers. Though the Zealots have officially been disavowed by their government, there are those who believe they are, at times, acting on orders from higher up. While the Zealots are the most obvious manifestation of House Va'ruun in the settled systems, there are covert operatives acting on behalf of the High Council as well. When House Va'ruun withdrew from galactic politics in the aftermath of the armistice, life on Va'ruun Kai, which was already arduous, could no longer benefit from regular trade. House Va'ruun began to rely on smugglers to draw necessary resources. resources. They worked with these smugglers by means of a network of undercover agents. These agents were carried out of their home system and dropped off on worlds outside of Varun space without knowledge of their homeworld's coordinates. Their first act on landing is to bury their ceremonial daggers to disguise themselves. After this, they traveled the settled systems in secret, working on orders from bosses outside Varun space. These bosses have ostensibly received their orders directly from the High Council. During the Serpent's Crusade, the United Colonies set up a network of star stations from which to fight House Varun. Now, nearly 70 years on, House Varun has turned these abandoned platforms into control stations for their undercover operatives. Along with cooperating with smugglers, the agents also infiltrate organizations. One such agent is Andreja, who has infiltrated the Exploration Society Constellation. After a childhood spent in Dazra, Andreja was made an operative and dropped off on Shoza 2, the first planet she had been to outside of Varun Kai. She then worked with different bands of smugglers until around 2328, when she intercepted a communique from Constellation requesting access to Varun space for the purpose of exploration. When she revealed this knowledge to her handler, Thomas Arkadik, she was assigned to infiltrate Constellation, and she was recruited by Barrett on Kazal. Shortly after she joined the Society, she attempted to access classified information and discovered that she had been found out by Sarah Morgan and Vladimir. While she assumed she would be kicked out and face punishment by the High Council, she was allowed to remain in Constellation. From her position, she has dispatched non-critical Constellation data to House Varun. She has decided not to share information concerning the mysterious artifacts with her handlers, and thus it seems that House Varun may yet be unaware of their presence. Being as vague as possible here to prevent main quest spoilers, Janan Varun does appear to have at least a tangential relationship with individuals who have interacted with the artifacts. There is a story told by the Promised that Janan Varun interacted with an unbeliever, a man who attempted to tell him false prophecy. Janan cut this unbeliever down, but he returned. They fought 4 times while the planet on which they stood rotated 120 times. This information is important to the captain of the Frontier in learning the truth about the artifacts. Recently, House Varun has restored communications with Ambassador Balmor, but the exact reason remains unclear. With that said, we've reached the end of what I've learned about House Varun and the Promised aside from a single note. It's possible to make your character have been raised as a worshipper of the Great Serpent with a Serpent's Embrace trait. While this makes you knowledgeable of the Great Serpent, it does not make you a member of House Varun. This trait creates some interesting interactions, especially with those of the Promised, but it does not affect the commitment ceremony with Andreja in any way. This is either an oversight by the developers, or House of Varun isn't just a theocratic state, but a theocratic ethnostate. I say this because even with the trait, Andreja tells you that you won't be with her at the Serpent's side in the shrouding. Either Bethesda was pressed for time and didn't want to add another version of the commitment ceremony with Andreja, or not even converts to the faith are welcome. Only those born of House Varun will have salvation. With that said, let's talk briefly about what we should see in Shattered Space. Specifically here, I'm going to refer to the interview with Tim Lamb, lead creative producer on Starfield at Gamescom. He said, quote, "You encounter a derelict star station, and this starts you on your adventure to meeting the Varun. You end up in their homeworld, Varun Kai, and the city of Dazra. There's been a catastrophic event. You deal with the minor houses of the faction of House Varun to sort of uncover the mystery of what happened, and then, resolve it as you do as a player. There's lots of choices in there for you." Close quote. Along with this, of Varun Kai itself, he said, quote, "So we have the city of Dazra. All our efforts have really been focused on the area around the city. So I think the beauty of it is that there's exploration, that you can find nooks and crannies in the game, or little secret discoveries or locations you feel like, I know I'm coming back here. So there's excitement there." Close quote. This feels like a good, spoiler-free preview, so let me just say what I'm hoping to see and what the trailer has me looking forward to. I want to know where Varun Kai is. I want to know why House Varun abandoned the settled systems, and if it is somehow connected to this catastrophic event referred to by Tim Lamb. I want to see growths, Andreja's home, and potentially her family. I want to see evidence that the population was ravaged by the losses in the Serpent's Crusade. I want to see the sap of the Venom Tree make an appearance. I want to see a forwarding of Andreja's companion questline and the consequences of our interactions with Tomisar Kadik. As for what's been shown, I'm excited. I like that they focused on a single planet rather than adding lots of procedurally generated worlds. I'm looking forward to working with the minor houses of House Varun, and hope that it'll be like working with the houses of the Dunmer in Morrowind. Alright, that should do it for this video. Follow me on X for lore video announcements at Gaming with Maps. My Discord is open to the public, there's a link in the channel's banner. I stream every Friday evening on YouTube, come check it out if you're interested. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a member on YouTube or a patron of Patreon. I want to thank my channel members and patrons, Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Dark Malcontent, Real76, Dr. Orion, Samsung Smart Fridge, Night Spearhead, Ahotep, Despy, Electric Head, Hero Cunning, Laced Cake, E, and NB Mole Miner for their support. I also want to specifically thank Dark Malcontent for helping with this video's script. This has been the Resolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.